Welcome to Authors of the Pacific Northwest, where we connect Pacific Northwest authors with new listeners and provide advice for aspiring authors on the business of writing. I'm your host, Vikki J. Carter. Hi there, podcast listeners. Thank you for coming back to the Authors of the Pacific Northwest. And today we have something very special. I have a guest author on who is currently en route to move here to the Pacific Northwest. His name is J.D. Barker. So, J.D., you want to say hi to us?
Hi, everybody. I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, you bet. I'm very much looking forward to having JD on, listeners, because JD has a really great history of publishing, and I view him as a success. I have a connection with him through a PR person that let me know about JD. So we're just going to dive right in. But JD, right now, currently you're not in the Pacific Northwest, but you were telling me a little bit about how you're trying to wrangle the idea of coming to the Northwest. So tell us a little bit about your interest in our beautiful state.
My wife and I, we're kind of wanderers, and we've been bouncing around quite a bit. We started off in Florida, and we love being near the ocean and the water and things like that. But if you've ever been to Florida, particularly in the summertime, you can burn to a crisp just walking to your mailbox. The sun is just brutal there. And we just couldn't take that anymore. And when I got to the point where I was writing full time and we could kind of live anywhere, we decided to make a move. We're actually in Pittsburgh right now because my wife has quite a bit of family up here. And it's so much nicer. I mean, because in the summertime you can actually go outside and you can do things. And, we've got obviously the winter is a lot more harsh up here, but it's nice. But we've been here for, I guess, about 2.5, 3 years now. And we're both feeling very landlocked. We really miss being near the water. Mm-hmm. So we've been looking at, the East Coast, in the New Hampshire area. We flew out to your area, I guess about 1.5 years ago now, and we looked very heavily on around Whidbey Island and the islands out there. And we completely fell in love with that. I mean, just the views and the houses and the people and everything. It was great. So that's where our focus is right now.
Well, we welcome you to come. You better buy a house soon. Whidbey Island is still in a reasonable housing market, but
we shouldn't talk about it on the podcast. Too many people are going to find out.
Well, if you listen to my podcast, my listeners know I discourage people moving here, but we'll take you. You're okay.
Okay.
So yeah, but the beautiful thing about the Northwest is that it has this beautiful season changes, and we're right now getting into the October weather. And so that's why we're talking to JD. So JD, share with our listeners that don't know about you yet a little bit about your genre, because it's kind of been, mixed in, but it fits in October very well. So share what you label your genre of writing.
I give a talk about not being pigeonholed into a genre.
I like
because that's something that happens pretty much from the get-go. I mean, I self-published my first novel, and we can talk about that in a little bit. But the first novel was horror, and then I wrote my second novel, and it was a full-on thriller. And I queried agents with that, and I ended up going the traditional route. And immediately, they dubbed me as a thriller author, and that's where they want me to be, and it makes sense. I mean, because everybody needs to know. They need to know where to put you in, the bookstores. They need to know where to market you and all those types of things. So they like to put that label on you straight off the bat. But I'm scared to death of getting stuck writing that same book over and over again.
Oh, I hear you.
So I made a conscious effort here to bounce around a little bit. So my first novel was horror. The second one was a thriller. My third one is a prequel to Dracula that I wrote with Bram Stoker's family. So we're back to horror again. And then I've got another thriller coming out. So I'm bouncing around a little bit. And honestly, I've gotten to know a lot of famous writers, and Dean Koontz sent me a really cool email early on that really helped me with this, because he mentioned that he put out 15 novels before he had his first bestseller. And I didn't realize that.
Oh,
and
wow.
he told me that first bestseller was a horror novel. And he said he immediately got dubbed as a horror novelist. And it started showing up, all of his marketing material, and every, interview he did, every newspaper article that came out, it was horror author this, horror author that. And he never felt that he was a horror author. He felt that, he was a suspense author, and, he might include horror, he might include something else, but, not definitively horror. So I kind of took a page from that, and I've been kind of doing the same thing. And he said, as long as you do it early on, and you do bounce around, the audience will be open to it. If I were to put out 4 or 5 horror novels in a row and then try to put out something different, it's going to be a lot more difficult to sway people. My agent's come around to it. She seems to be on board, and now we're just trying to convince the publishers that it's the right way to go.
I love it. Well, I embrace that idea because as you and I were talking, I am an aspiring author, so I'm working on my first 2 novels, but they're very different novels altogether. And I usually lead in my interviews about genre because most people will just kind of stick with one genre. But I love the idea of not being pigeonholed. I think in our society today, with the way the publishing industry is changed, that you might not have to. And that's pretty exciting from a writer standpoint. If something comes to you and you're inspired, it doesn't fit that genre that you usually typically write in, I think it's exciting not to have to. So fantastic.
I do think you do need to keep that common thread. I think Dean was right about that. And I tend to keep, every one of my novels has a very strong element of suspense, and that probably is my common thread between all of them. I don't think you couldn't jump from like romance to Western to sci-fi. It couldn't be crazy leaps like that, but as long as they're right next door to each other, I think you're okay.
And I agree with you too. And I think that the advice that I get from a lot of individuals too is that you're going to typically write what you read, what you prefer to read. You're going to be very more interested in writing kind of in that scope and that scale. And so you must have read a lot of suspense, thriller, and horror, growing up and moving on. I did read your bio, so I know you did, but is that typically where you land when it came to reading? Was that kind of work?
It's funny because, looking back on it, that's actually where I started out. And I never really thought about it much until I started picking things apart. But we didn't have a television in our house when I was a kid. TV was kind of a forbidden thing. And, back, this was the 70s to really date myself. I mean, there wasn't much to watch anyway. You had 3 channels, no DVR. So, whatever you turned on happened to be on. So we were heavily into books. And my mom owned an antique store. So she would, drag us along to garage sales and yard sales and estate sales and things like that on a fairly regular basis. So I was reading from a very young age. She put books in our hands pretty much right away. And we used to go to the library a couple times a week. And when I would go to yard sales, I'd have my allowance money and I would use it to buy books.
I love it.
And some of the first ones that I bought were the first, what I consider to be, like big kid books or adult books. I bought the Hardy Boys series and the Nancy Drew series. I bought like a big old box of them for like $1.25 or something, and probably half the collection.
I read all of them. I think the Nancy Drews for sure.
Yeah, they're fantastic, and but they're mystery novels. So I think that's kind of what got me started along that. I read all those by the time I got into kindergarten. And then I started graduating into more, like adult books or young, probably be young adult nowadays, Treasure Island and, a lot of the Charles Dickens stuff. The first, what I felt was an adult book that I picked up was Dracula. I remember buying that one when I was 8 years old. I remember buying it for 25 cents and haggling with the guy to get them down from 50 cents. And, and it's one of those books that's been a constant on my bookshelf. I mean, it's, it gets worn out. I replace it. I get another one. And at this point, I've got the ebook. I've got the audio book. I've got it, in every possible version. Yeah. I tend to read, cross genre quite a bit. As long as it's a good story, I really don't care what the genre is.
Awesome. Well, I love it. Well, I think that's great. We'll wrap back around to Dracula because you have a history now with Dracula. So very fascinating history. But let's start with one other question for our listeners. When did you know you were a particular author? Was it young? Kind of walk us through that process of when it dawned on you the power of creation through writing as an author.
Well, again, it's one of those things that, until you look back on it, you don't realize that it's actually happening. But because my mom used to take us to the library all the time, I have a sister who's 15 months younger than me. So we kind of hung out a lot together and we did a lot of stuff together. I used to create stories, like I would write stories when I was little and I would staple them and I created my own little library in my room. And my sister would come in and she would check out, my stories. And when she didn't return them in time, I whacked her with late fees, which I think at this point, she probably owes me a ridiculous amount.
I love it. You're speaking to a librarian here, so my background.
Oh, okay.
So this is like making me sing. Yay, this is great. So continue. I love the story.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of where it started. And our parents kind of threw us in the middle of it anyway, because my father was a contractor and we lived in Crystal Lake, Illinois, which had nothing to do with Jason, but it was called Crystal Lake, Illinois. And he bought a big old forest. It was probably, I think it was like 20 acres or so of big old oak trees, and he built a giant English tutor like in the middle of it. And all of our friends just, straight off assumed that we were in like a haunted house and the forest was haunted. And, little kids just kind of make up stories about that. So I think the first few stories that I wrote were based around that, and, just kind of evolved from there.
I love it. Such great stories. Thank you for your parents for allowing your creativity to come out very young and didn't stifle it. That's fantastic. And so awesome. So
they tried. They tried later.
Oh, yeah?
when my mom realized that I was heading in the writerly direction and planning on trying to make a living at that, she wanted me to go to college and get an actual degree. And I did. I've actually got 2.5 degrees right now. I've got one in business, another one in information technology, and I started on a psychology degree.
Oh, wow.
And now I get paid to make shit up, so none of it actually mattered.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
But yeah, no, they always felt that this was, a hobby and like not one of those things that you can really make a living at. And, I'd like to think that I proved her wrong, but I just saw her the other day and, it's like, I'm doing pretty well. And she's like, yeah, but it's not a steady paycheck. It's not like working for somebody else where you've got benefits and you've got that. But
I love it. I love those internal, motivators are so helpful, even if it's something like that, right? Because I feel
absolutely.
I feel like you're terribly successful. We're going to talk a lot about your success here because I want the listeners to hear the process. We'll get there, but those internal motivators, we all should have them, right? And to help us keep moving. I have my degrees and I have a great career in higher education. I love what I do, but I didn't feel fulfilled. And I knew that writing was going to be that piece to be the fulfillment, for my future. And so I think it's awesome that you powered through, did you do before your first book came out in 2012, were you working a regular job and you're writing on the side? I call it side hustle. Were you doing the side hustle? Or were you lucky?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think pretty much everybody in this business kind of does that. My last real day job, and this sounds horrible, and it really was. I was a chief compliance officer for a brokerage firm.
Oh no, that's great writing material right there.
Well, it's a bad thing because it paid really well. It was a horrible job, but it paid really good. And I think that's actually a negative. And like, if you talk to Stephen King, he's going to tell you one of the things that really motivated him is he worked some horrible jobs. He worked in a laundromat. He did these things that he did not want to go to work every day. And that forced him to go home and write to try and find a way out of it.
Exactly.
While I was doing that, I was working as a book doctor and a ghostwriter on the side. Because most writers will tell you that, I had no problem writing for free. I enjoyed doing it. It was my detox. It's what, kept me grounded. It's awesome that people want to pay me for it now, but if that stopped tomorrow, that wouldn't keep me from writing. I would still hit my Mac every day. So I would work a day job and I would basically come home and I would work on other people's books. And I did that for a little over 20 years, for about 23 years. And it really, I think that's where I really learned how to write, because I got to figure out what worked and what didn't work, what agents were looking for, what editors wanted to see. And it really allowed me to fine tune my own craft. And during that, I was working on my own books at the same time, but I don't sleep a whole lot.
Doesn't sound like it.
But I enjoyed it. And I ended up having over the 23 years, 6 different books that hit the New York Times bestseller list, but they had somebody else's name on them. And that, when number 6 hit, that was kind of the final one for me. And that's where I decided to strike out on my own.
What a great background, though. I don't see that as a negative. I see that as, like you said, it's a great positive in the sense that first you got to see probably good writing, marginal writing, not so great, kind of that thing. So you got to see what is important for the market. You probably did you get to witness kind of the publishing process as well as you're working with those individuals, those 6 individuals, how it moved for them? So you got a little bit of background in the industry a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, because a lot of the work that I got, it came from basically 3 people. It was either authors that had a novel that an agent just wasn't willing to pick up on, or saw something in and told them, do this tweak, do that tweak, weren't able to do it on their own. So authors were a big part. Agents were another part, because a lot of times an agent will give that feedback to an author and an author is just too close to make the changes.
Exactly.
So sometimes the agents would send it to me, and sometimes it ended up with an editor. An editor's got a client, that's either too busy, they're on a book tour, especially when these guys start taking off and they're trying to figure out how to juggle everything.
Yeah, exactly.
So they've got a new book the editor's got a new book on their desk and it needs to be tweaked, but the author's not available or doesn't have time to do it. So they would send me stuff. So I kind of got to work with all these people behind the scenes. And that really clued me into, what they wanted. One of the things that I really learned that I didn't realize, and it's true today more than any time, is editors are ridiculously busy. Mm-hmm. And they've got a giant stack of books on their desk. And the last thing they want to do or have time to do is to take on a project. Mm-hmm. So the more polished you get your novel before it gets to that point, the better. I mean, if an editor picks it up and they give it that one read, and they realize, hey, this is a pretty solid book and I don't have to do a whole lot to it. Two things happen. They're more likely to pick it up and you're more likely to get a bigger advance.
I love that. I think that's valuable advice for anybody that's aspiring or working on their first novel, or maybe they have a couple of novels out as independent authors and they want to make the jump to traditional. Valuable advice. I think we picture, it's just hard to picture the industry because you can't see what's going on behind the scenes. So if you get a rejection letter or something like that, it's hard to understand maybe the total reason for rejection. So I think
a lot of times they don't tell you. You get a form letter, and that's it.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, that's a great background into leading us into your very first book in 2012. I think it was Forsaken, correct? And that was the book you self-published. So take us on the journey of that novel and getting to self-publication. Kind of, why did you choose self-publication? A lot of my authors on the podcast choose self-publication, but why did you particularly? You had some background. You knew what people were looking for.
Yeah. So, so number 6 at the New York Times bestseller list, and that's where I decided to write my own book. And Forsaken, I had the idea in my head, so I hammered out the novel itself pretty quick. And anybody who's written a novel, they know, you want to get to that finish line. And in the story, I had to explain where the wife bought a journal and to get the book done. To get that, I wrote that she walked into Needful Things, Stephen King's store, and bought it there. And I fully expected to have to change that, change it to, Wanted Things, some other, whatever it might be, but, swap it out with something. But permission to use it. Like, how do you get Stephen King's permission to do much of anything?
Exactly.
But we decided to give that a shot. He's got a house in Florida that's about 10 minutes from my parents' house. So we printed up the manuscript. We hopped in the car. We figured, well, we'll go over to Steve's house. He'll probably be outside gardening or something, and I'll, hand him off the book. He'll give me the thumbs up, and we'll be on our way. It didn't quite work out that way. He lives on Casey Key, and Keys in Florida are like little islands right off through the coast. And there's a 1-lane bridge that you go over, and it's one of those kind that swivels in the center to let the boats go by. And when you get to the end of the bridge, if you make a left, you go to the public portion of the key where all the restaurants and the beaches and stuff are. And if you make a right, you go to like the entire half that Stephen King owns. And immediately there's a private drive sign, and then there was a no trespassing sign. Then there was a gate, and then there was another gate. And like I got maybe a half mile in, and I'm staring up into the trees looking for snipers, and I'm thinking this is probably a bad idea. So we turned the car around and we went to a little restaurant, and I reached out to a friend of mine. His name was Jack Ketchum. He passed away a couple of months ago, and told him what we were up to. And he knows King pretty well. And he said, oh, yeah, don't stalk Steve. He hates that. Here's his email address. Just email it over to him. If he likes the book, you'll hear back from him. If you don't hear anything, the book probably sucks. Leave the guy alone. So I did that. And then I, got an email back from King, and he said, I love it. Go ahead and use it. Let me know if you need anything. And I stared at that for probably about 4 months, waiting for the, another email to come in saying, that was actually meant for Grisham or somebody else, not you. But
sorry.
It never came. So I figured, okay, now I'm a first-time author, but I've got a book that Stephen King read and gave me a thumbs up on to use some of his stuff. How hard could this possibly be? Yeah. So I put together a query letter. And I shot it off to 200 agents. It was just some list that I downloaded from a news group or something. And just shot off the same form letter to every single one of them, which is a big no-no. Never use a form letter. And I only got a handful of responses back. No rejections because nobody actually asked to read the book. The couple that did, I had one offer from a publisher, but the advance was only like $5,000. I mean, the attention I was getting just was very minimal. And at the time, I didn't know it was because of the query letter. I didn't realize what I had done wrong.
Gotcha.
So I made a conscious decision. I said, well, okay, let me do this. I'm going to self-publish the book, but I'm going to do it in a way that it's going to be on par with something coming out of Random House. I've got to make sure it's that, formatted that way, looks that way. Otherwise, it's not worth doing.
Exactly.
So I hired professionals across the board. I got, editors, formatters, professional cover design, and all of those things, and then released the book, totally self-published as a hardcover, softcover, audiobook, mass market paperback. Everything came out on the same day. And then things just got crazy from there. It started catching on. People started picking it up, and word of mouth spread, because I kind of screwed up on the advertising or the marketing portion too. I didn't realize that most publications like to see the book months in advance of it coming out. So I didn't even try until after I hit the publish button. So that kind of hindered me a little bit.
Well, great advice. Thanks for sharing that.
So the book ended up selling really well. It sold about 250,000 copies or so. Mm-hmm. And that was enough to land me on the radar of the traditional guys. But mm-hmm. it also, if you self-published anything, the economics there. I mean, as a self-published author, you're getting 70 cents on the dollar. Mm-hmm. And if you're traditionally published, you're probably going to get 25 cents on the dollar.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
During all of this, while this was going on, I was writing my second book, which was The Fourth Monkey. And I fully expected to self-publish that one too, because I was doing really well financially. I, was totally in control of everything. I didn't have to answer to anybody.
Yeah.
I told my wife that. So I told my wife that I was thinking about self-publishing, and she's, again, she's way smarter than me. She said, well, go ahead and send it out to a couple of agents, see what happens. And, if you don't get any bites again, then go ahead and self-publish. It worked out good. Mm-hmm. So I queried 53 agents. I remember this was February of 2014. And within 2 weeks, I had 13 offers of representation. So
awesome.
It was kind of a very different
query letter, obviously.
Yeah. And what's funny is that, at that point, it didn't even fit like a standard form query letter at all. I mean, I didn't even mention the book, I think, until like the third paragraph.
Yeah.
I just kind of talked about some of the things that were going on in my writerly life.
But you had already from that book had developed an authoritative aspect in the sense that your first self-published book was doing very, very well. So you didn't really need to have an agent and go that traditional route. You were choosing to. And that probably is a little attractive to agents as well as publishing companies, because you already have that platform developed. They don't have to groom you into the platform. Is that how it felt to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the self-publishing model, I think they use that as a proving ground at this point. Mm-hmm. Everybody's watching it. Amazon in particular, I mean, they've got their own imprints. They know exactly who's selling and who's not.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, they're picking from that lot. You can still get a traditional deal, straight off the bat with your debut novel. But I think, for me anyway, it really helped to be able to walk in there with a track record.
I love it. I think
and you have to be ready. You have to be ready to walk away too. And I think they kind of felt that I would. I mean, I had no reason why I couldn't have self-published the next book if I didn't want to.
Exactly. And there's plenty out there of people that are making it very well, great livings and income on self-publishing, but they have to market not just fictional novels, but they're also doing novel books for self-help. I mean, they really dabble in a bunch of other genres to develop that income, that static income. And not everybody has the desire to do that. They may just want to write, and that's what they want to do for their living. And so, but they better be great writers if that's what they want to do, in my opinion. And this is so fascinating, JD. Thanks so much for sharing that process with me, particularly because I'm always on the fence. And I if you knew this from talking to me a few minutes ago, but I'm working on my first 2 novels. And that's what started this podcast, was really like what's out there on the landscape of traditional versus independent publishing. And since I've had so many authors come on in different aspects, and some have moved like you, not as successfully, but some have moved from self-publishing to traditional, then it's fascinating to me and it's inspiring to me. You put out your first book with the idea that it has to be the same quality as anything that's traditionally published. And I think that's fabulous. Fabulous advice.
Well, that's the biggest mistake I see people make. I go around the country now and I give a talk about how I actually did this and how I sold that many copies. And the biggest problem I see people do is they hit that publish button way too early.
I agree.
They get their first draft done. They feel that it's 100% perfect. They run through it all on their own and try to self-edit, which is impossible. Yeah. And then they just hit that publish button. And I see the same thing happen over and over again. They get 4 or 5 reviews from their mom and their friends, telling them how great it is, and 4 and 5 star reviews. And then somebody real actually buys the book. And it's a 2-star review complaining about the punctuation and the grammar problems and how wordy it is. And, all these little things that, can be worked out. I mean, I go through the same process today with my traditionally published stuff that I did with Forsaken. It basically goes through about 5 or 6 different drafts. I write the first draft locked in my room, and then I polish it as well as I feel I can. Then my wife reads it, and she completely tears it apart and hands it back, tells me everything that's wrong with it. I cry for a couple of days, and I go back in my office and I write it again. After I get done with that part, it goes out to beta readers, and I've got six. My last book, 6 very critical beta readers. One of them actually gave me a 1-star review on Forsaken. But she was right. I mean, I read through her review and she had some good points. So I asked her to take her review down in exchange for being a beta reader. But I've got some very critical people, and to me, like, each one of them represents, like 10,000 in sales. So if they find something wrong, 10,000 other people are going to find that same thing wrong once I put it out there, if I let it get that far. So I, take all their feedback and I rewrite the book again. And then once I get through that process, then it goes out and I've got a copy editor that runs through it. And then I, clean up her version of it. And then once that's done, then it finally goes to my agent. So, we're 4 or 5 drafts in before I let anybody see it. And then that's for books that are coming out through the traditional guys. I mean, once Random House gets a hold of it, it goes through my editor at the publishing company. Then, they're copy editors, and, they've got people that do this whole thing all over again. So, this book is, any book really is, from my standpoint, go through this over and over and over again. But, it's the only way to get it as tight as it possibly can be.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, because I've been struggling personally. So you're just inspiring me today. So thank you. I appreciate it. I'm working on drafts, and I'm working on these drafts, and I feel like, I'm never going to get it out. But I have learned, and I've listened to enough people to know, your first couple of drafts, you're telling yourself the story. It doesn't mean that it's clear and good enough for readers yet, and you have to have those other eyes, those editors. You have to pretty much hire an editor if you're going to self-publish to do some editing, copy editing, and you need to have really critical reviewers. So I had one of my good close reviewers is also related to me, but she's no holds bar. And I read some of the stuff to her this weekend, and she was very critical, and it hurt at first. And I was like, ouch, that hurts. But then when I started thinking about it, I'm like, I'm so glad you said those things, because if you can pull those pieces out, like you said, others will find it. So I need to go back and fix those pieces. So it's really valuable to have that collaboration, no matter what you're doing, independent or traditional. So thank you for sharing that. So Let's go into some more collaboration, because you have some pretty high profile collaborators you've been working with lately. And so which I think is really exciting. And as an author standpoint, that's like what you dream for, right? So tell us about Dracula, because I believe by the time this podcast comes out, that book will be released in October of this year. So tell us about that and how your collaboration there got started, because it's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I keep telling people that I've captured lightning in a bottle a couple of times, and not to stand next to me outside, because karma is going to try to even everything out at some point, and you don't want to be standing next to me when that final lightning strike happens.
I love it.
I thought, I thought with what happened with Stephen King was, that was huge, and I figured that's it for me. That's going to be the big tale that I have. But it didn't turn out that way. So Forsaken got nominated for a Bram Stoker Award for Best Debut Novel. And while I was at the conference, the Horror Writers Conference, I met Dacre Stoker, who's Bram Stoker's great grandnephew, the guy who wrote Dracula. And we ended up sitting next to each other at an author signing, and I found out later that actually wasn't a mistake. It was actually an audition. He wanted to meet me and talk to me before he presented something to me. So we sat next to each other for about an hour and a half or so, and I had a living, breathing Stoker next to me, so I was picking his brain about everything Dracula related. And he kept asking me questions about, my writing career. And I'm like, well, why is he even bothering? I'm still a nobody at this point. Yeah. But, we talked for, that hour or so, and then we kind of went our separate ways. And he kept grabbing me in the hallway saying, hey, we need to sit down for 5-10 minutes. I've got something I want to run by you. And it was so crazy. We didn't really get a chance to do it. So we made plans to have breakfast on the final morning that we were all there. And halfway through the breakfast, he said, listen, I've got something I've got to admit to you. I read Forsaken a while back, and my family's read it. And we've been trying to find somebody to write a prequel to Dracula for a while now using Bram's original notes. And we feel your style is a really good fit for that. Is that something you'd be interested in?
Oh my goodness.
I was halfway through my eggs, and I think I dropped half my plate.
I would have choked.
Looking around the room. Yeah, I was waiting for Ashton Kutcher to come right down from a corner, come over the camera and tell me I was getting punked. But it turned out it was for real. So he invited my wife and I up to the cabin that he had in the Carolinas. On the second night we were there, he disappeared for a little bit. He came back with his big old wooden box, and set it down on the dining room table, as theatrically as you can possibly imagine, and opened it up, and it was the items that were on Bram's desk when he wrote Dracula.
Oh my heavens!
He had maps, he had scraps of paper, he had one of Bram's original journals. I mean, all kinds of crazy material. Part of Dracula was written in a daytimer. I had no idea. But Bram Stoker worked in the theater. He was a theater manager. So he used a daytimer to plot out his novel. And that makes sense. I mean, when you think about it as a writer, you're trying to get all your days and your times and everything organized.
Yeah.
So why not use a daytimer?
Yeah.
And one of the things that he shared with me, which I didn't realize, is the first 101 pages of Dracula actually got stripped from the book. So Jonathan Harker on the Train, which is the beginning that we all know, is actually on page 102 of the original novel.
Oh.
Bram originally tried to sell Dracula as a true story. The original preface for the book and everything in the first 100 pages, he basically handed it to his publisher and said, "This is a true story." And his publisher, read it, slid it right back across the desk and said, "No way, we're not doing that." At the time in London, Jack the Ripper was running around. People were scared half to death. And, we all saw later what happened with War of the Worlds. I think that's kind of what his publisher was thinking.
Exactly.
People that way. So they spent a lot of time, tweaking the novel and basically turning it from fact into fiction. And then that, was finally published. Bram hated that idea. I mean, he really, in his mind, and from what we found in his notes, he wanted Dracula to serve as a warning to people. It seems like he actually believed vampires were real, and he wanted the story to present that. He actually found a way to make that happen, which I thought was really clever. In today's world, I got to backtrack a little bit, but I publish a novel. I send it off to my agent, and my editor gets it here in the U.S. And I'm in, I think, 31 different languages at this point. So my editor in the U.S. will farm it out to all those other publishers, and then they translate it and they put it out. But I'm working off one draft the entire time. In his time, when he did this, he had his UK publisher, but then when he started getting picked up in other countries, the draft of the book actually left from his desk. It didn't come from his publisher. So he was able to take a lot of the stuff that the UK publisher took out of the book, and he put it back in before he sent it off to these other countries. So what Dacre uncovered through some other people is that, if you grab a first edition of Dracula from, in foreign language and you translate it to English, there's some serious differences there. There's differences in the storylines. There's different characters.
Fascinating.
Dracula had a love interest at one point. There's other people in the castle, all kinds of crazy things that, didn't make it into this final book.
I love it.
But it's so difficult. You have to go to a first edition because Dracula being public domain, anybody can publish it at this point.
Yeah, exactly.
So even when they go foreign language, they tend to work off the Gutenberg version that's available on the internet. So they're working off that same K edition. So they're still finding stuff. They found a ton of material in the Icelandic version. They're finding more in a version that came out of Germany. And it's crazy.
Absolutely awesome.
The book that we wrote, it's called Dracul, and it focuses very heavily on the missing text from those first 101 pages.
Oh, I love it. And it comes out October 2018, correct?
Yep, October 2nd.
Yep, because I saw your countdown on your website. We're recording this a little bit before the 1st of October, but we're releasing this in October, so you can grab the book probably by the time it comes out. So very, very cool. So did it take you a while to wrap your mind around working with this material? I mean, for me, it feels like sacred. It would feel like sacred material. I would have a hard time, wanting to even dig into it. That's the librarian side of me,
It absolutely did. I mean, it was, that's kind of, Dracula is kind of the holy grail. And I told you it was one of the first books that I read as a kid.
Yeah.
And, to see that kind of, detail and get a peek behind the curtain was huge. Paul Allen, who was one of the co-founders of Microsoft, he actually invited us out to Seattle at one point to view the original Dracula manuscript because he's got it. So we spent about 8 hours in the conference room flipping through the pages. Yeah, and that to me was probably the coolest part about it, because you've got the actual typed document in front of you, and you've got Bram's handwritten notes on the side, and you've got notes from his editor and a big blue crayon-looking pen. Stuff like that. And the funny thing is, like, those comments aren't very different from what we see in today's world. I love this part from his editor. This part's terrible, replace, stuff like that. It's the same things that we get nowadays from our editor, except it comes in a Microsoft Word document.
Yeah, exactly.
But that was huge. A lot of the text actually came from Bram's notes in his journals. So we had to really match his voice and his cadence. That was probably the trickiest part. I think the whole time I was writing that book, I listened to the audiobook for Dracula on just constant repeat, just to keep his writing style and his sentence structure in my head. And I think it worked. I mean, I can't tell half the time when I'm looking at it which parts were his and which came from us. So I think we pulled it off.
Fascinating. A totally different writing process than if it was just you coming up with a muse and a story in your own head and your own mind. I would think a huge challenge to carry on the same writing voice as an author like that. So,
well, we also had to end the book, and everybody knows where Dracula starts. So, yes. I had certain characters I couldn't kill Dracula because obviously he's in the next book. So things like that we had to play into as well. So it was definitely tricky.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Absolutely I love the story. And since we're in the October theme, I'll reveal just a little bit about my love for the horror. My 100% all-time favorite story is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Like, to this day, I still think how much I would love to have been around when she was writing that and the whole aspect of the whole story in itself. I did some literature reviews on it in college and stuff, and it's way more than just Frankenstein. It's the whole aspect of the story around it. But I think it's amazing that you get the opportunity, and it basically landed in your lap. How crazy is that? Would you have been totally nervous if you had known he had set that up as an interview for you and it wasn't just a casual, hey, get to know you, oh my gosh, you're this person, let me pick your brain?
Yeah, I'm sure I would have been. I would have probably been a wreck.
Yeah. I love it. I love opportunities like that when you don't know they're there and then they just come along. So it looks like the universe is smiling on you very well. So
yeah, it's been good so far.
But here's the deal. This is what I'm hearing from you, though, is you are taking chances. You're putting yourself out there. You're not like just sitting back and writing at your computer at home and just kind of hit, like you said, publish and just waiting for things to come your way. You're putting yourself in places where there's opportunity for that. If you had not gone to that actual conference and were sitting there selling your books, that opportunity wouldn't have came, to you. So it's... Yeah,
I mean, as an author, the one thing I've always got in the back of my mind is every year there's 1 million books that are published, whether it's traditional or indie, and you may have one. So you've got to figure out what you're going to do to make your one title stand out among that, the other 999,999.
Yeah.
And it's not easy. So you have to, watch for those opportunities. Don't be afraid to ask. The worst case, somebody's just going to say no. I mean, with the Stephen King thing, most people probably wouldn't have done that.
Exactly.
But I figured, worst case, he's going to just say no. Don't, leave me alone.
Yep.
And I'm right back where I started from. So no harm, no foul.
I love it. You're exemplifying my word for the year for myself. I chose in January of 2017, so we're going into my full year of this word. I decided that when I was going to announce that I was going to start writing and I was going to do a podcast, I was going to become fearless. And I incorporated that word into everything I do now. And it's hilarious because my husband's watching me just, step into these arenas. He's like, I never thought you would ever do this. I never thought, when you said you were going to do a podcast, I wasn't quite sure where you were really going to do it. But no, if you don't push yourself into places, you're never going to get where you want to go. And you must have a very clear vision of where you would like to see yourself. And those opportunities are coming to you because you've opened yourself and said, I'm going to do this. So I love that part of it. I love it. So let's talk, and then we're going to probably end up the podcast. So listeners, we're going to have a little bit different format. So JD won't be reading. We're going to leave that up to you to go find his books, and you can find them on the show notes and read them for yourself. We're just very privileged to have JD take the time out. Oh, we did want to talk about this too, but it's a very busy schedule. So before we end the podcast, JD and I were talking a little bit before recording about the process of having his books translated into different languages and being published in different languages in different countries, because it adds a whole different element to the timeline and how busy he is. So JD, why don't you share that with our listeners too? So us as aspiring authors, we get a kind of a feel of how crazy it can be once you start publishing into different countries and languages.
Yeah, it's a crazy amount of work, and I don't think everybody realizes that. I mean, most people they've got this romantic image in their mind of what a writer does all day, and to a large extent, I mean, part of it's true. I mean, I wake up at like 8 o'clock in the morning, and I wander 10 feet down the hallway to my office with my cup of coffee. So my commute's pretty short. I don't usually run into traffic.
Yeah, I have the same commute, but I work from home.
Yeah, but you have to learn how to juggle things. And one of the things that I had to do is I turn off my internet until about noon every day.
Nice.
I knock out my words first thing in the morning, so I don't look at social media, I don't look at emails, I don't look at anything. I park myself on my desk and I hit the ground writing. I tend to, I don't get up from my desk from the writing process unless I know what my next sentence is going to be. And I find that as long as I do that, then my brain kind of continues the story as I go on with the rest of my day. One of the biggest mistakes I used to see back when I was doing the book doctor thing is people would write until the well was dry. They crank out 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 words sometimes in a sitting, and they just fall over exhausted. And then the next day, when you have to do it all over again, they stare at a blank screen for hours and they can't figure out what comes next. So as long as you get up, and even if it's mid-sentence, as long as you know what's coming next, your brain will keep working for you. And, I go on a 5-mile run every day, and, times like that, my brain is working out the story details. So when I sit down again, I immediately just start typing. So I basically write until about 12 o'clock every day. I shoot to get 2,000 to 3,000 words done every day, on whatever novel I'm currently working on. Then at noon, I have lunch really quick, and then I turn on the internet, and that's where the real mess starts.
Oh, yes, it does.
And when you're published just in the U.S., you've got, your book comes out, and you've got, interviews with traditional press, you've got bloggers, you've got podcasts, things like that you have to do to get the word out. But when you're published in other countries, that cycle repeats itself. The book tends to come out in the U.S. first, and then maybe 2-3 months later, it'll come out, somewhere else, and then it comes out somewhere else and somewhere else. And, sometimes it's like a simultaneous release in the U.K. And, it's just, you're all over the place. And every single time you've got a new influx of people asking you questions and, vying for your time. And there's only so much time in the day. So I always tell people just, like in my case, I make sure I get the words done every day, because if there isn't the next book, all this stuff comes to a crashing halt.
Exactly.
So the next book is my number one focus. It may not be the number one focus of my publishers or the media people that I'm talking to, but it has to always be mine. So I try to keep that in mind. I've got a new element that's happening now with Dracul, because now there's a lot of travel involved. I think I've got, in October, I'm going to be in like 4 or 5 states, within like a week here in the U.S. And then we head overseas to Dublin in the U.K. And then we come back and we do, even more here in the U.S. And I have a really hard time writing when I'm away from my desk. I'm still trying to figure that out, whether I'm on a plane or I'm in a hotel. That part gets tricky, but the deadlines don't change. Nobody else cares, what you're up to.
They don't care. Your deadline's there, right? And writing on a plane is miserable. I don't know if anybody's tried it. I have many times, and I'm like, this isn't functioning for me. Of course, I don't sit in first class. I don't know about you. So there's not a lot of room to bring my laptop out to start with, so it's like, miserable.
Yeah, I'm always worried about that person peeking over my shoulder. And they probably don't care what I'm doing, but
me too.
I just feel like there's somebody. Yeah.
Oh, anyways. So awesome. So continue. I'm sorry, I interrupted. So I love that you start your day, you shut off the internet. I'm loving this. It's fantastic.
So there's a lot of things that get into your head when you're writing, and you've got I tend to read almost all my reviews. I hit Goodreads, sometime during the day, and I tend to read everything that comes out. And a lot of people will tell you that's a no-no. But for the most part, my reviews are good, and it helps keep me going. It's sort of like fueling the fire a little bit. But there's a lot of distractions out there. I mean, you hit one bad review, and then that can derail you. Or I've got 2 movies and a TV show that are in the works right now, and you get phone calls from people involved with that. And, that's a whole other animal, because they take your book and they have to change it to fit whatever the media is. So for like Fourth Monkey, one of the conversations I had over and over again is, okay, this is what we're going to have to do to get this book down to a 2-hour feature film. This character's got to come out. This storyline has to change. This has to happen. So when you've got other people telling you how they're going to adapt your story, those things get in your head.
Oh my goodness.
It's a tricky thing. So you have to, the focus just always has to be on that next book, just getting that next book done, and everything else is just noise.
Great advice. And also I'm hearing, be careful what you wish for, people. Because as much of us, all of us want to sit there, we want to live this life that you're portraying right now. I'm sitting there going, I don't know if I could, if I had a movie offer and they're telling me I have to kill a character out or not have that character, I don't know if I can handle that. You would need to handle it, but I'm not sure if I could as the creator of the book.
I think it was in on writing. Stephen King is kind of like my go-to guy, because he's kind of got this down. I tend to follow the people that have done it right, and I try to emulate them as much as I can. And I think it was on writing, but he mentioned that the only thing that is actually yours as the author is the written book. So that print version is yours, because even the second an audiobook narrator gets a hold of it, now you've got their take on your book, so it's already different. And with, Fourth Monkey and those guys, we had those, I always wanted a feature film until you start talking to directors and they start telling you those things. Then I started leaning very heavily towards, Netflix and HBO because they were kind of the opposite. Well, we can do 5 to 10 episodes and we can tell your whole story. What did you take out of the book? What other material do you have that we can put in here? Ultimately, with Fourth Monkey, we went with CBS because they gave us both. They were able to do a feature film with the follow-up television show. So
fantastic.
There was no way to say no to that. And then with Dracul, Paramount picked up the film rights that actually sold before the print rights did. And it's the same team that remade It for Stephen King. So Andy Muschietti is directing. That's in really good hands over there too.
Super great. Super great. Yeah. I do love Netflix originals though. I think that from what I've seen in Netflix originals, they translate so well because it feels like Netflix producers have a lot more leeway in some things. And I actually fall in love a lot of Netflix originals. That's probably where I need to stop watching and start writing because I'm like, gosh, these are so good. I got to stop. Yeah. So
gotta get turned off right with the internet.
It's, that's really powerful advice. And I really appreciate it. Everybody, I talk to a lot of people and a lot of people know that I work from home. I have a steady full-time job, but I work remote. And they're like, well, you should have plenty of time to write. And I'm like, well, no, I'm on the phone with meetings all day. And, I have to be online and blah, blah, blah. But I know there's times in my day where I couldn't shut off because since I started the podcast, I now have had to be on social media a whole lot more than I ever thought I would ever be in my life. And it's preparing me for my future because I believe that one of my books will be, out there and it'll be my thing and I can leave my day job and just write.
Well, let me ask you a question. Do you write and work on the podcast and do your day job all from the same desk?
No, I actually, most of the day I split between the two. I have a whole different area that I work with the podcast productions and writing, and my work desk is separate. I try to keep them separate in my mind. Because
that's important too.
I go crazy.
It's tough when you work from home because if you're trying to write a book in the same seat where you normally work from home, you've got Post-it notes around your things related to that job and there's distractions there. Yeah. So I always tell people if they're going to be, trapped in the same place all the time, have a separate spot where you do your writing. Like that's the only thing that you do there. Yeah. And that helps quite a bit to just isolate yourself.
Yeah. And I love the fact that you brought out the idea that you get away and you exercise and you do the physical aspect too. Cause I from working from home, I'm going on my 7th year working from home. I discovered that it's very sedentary and my other jobs were not. And so I had to force myself to put in my routines of eating well and exercising well to keep my creative voice going. So when I do get the moments to write, I'm having the moments because I've been out and I've been creative. I've been physically active too. So very, very good points. I love it. So awesome. Let's finish up the podcast with what you have on the future because you are working on something with somebody very famous. Also, not that Stephen King was not, for heaven's sakes. That's amazing. But tell us about what's on the works for you to pique our listeners' interest, and then we'll close out the podcast.
Yeah, so it comes down to that whole capturing lightning in a bottle thing. And, after some of those things happened, I figured that was it again. But my phone rang, I guess it was probably in November or so last year. And it was a number from Florida that I didn't recognize. And I picked up on it and fully expected it to be a telemarketer. And every once in a while, I'll mess with them just to see if I can make them cry, trying to get them off my phone, but just something to break up the day a little bit. It turned out to be Jim Patterson. He read Fourth Monkey and he loved it. He actually gave me a really cool blurb where he called it ingenious. And then he invited me down to his house in Florida to talk a little bit. And I ended up doing that over Christmas last year. I got a tour of his house and his office, and we went out to lunch, and we decided to collaborate and write something together. That's what we've been working on. We went back and forth a couple of weeks on just bouncing ideas and trying to come up with something that we both liked. And then we just we hit the ground running with it, and it's a fantastic project. I mean, I'm able to work with one of the masters, and I feel like I'm back in school again.
I love that part of it. That's the part I was going to ask you about because I know he does a lot of like master classes where you can, go in and learn from him from the craft and that kind of a thing. But not many people are going to get a one-on-one sort of mentorship in an actual co-writing opportunity with him. So I am so excited for you in that aspect. And I'm also excited to read the book. But how has it changed you in a sense? You know, I mean, as far as, because you've already had some great success. So now you're working with one of the masters. How has it changed you just in immediate changes, if there are any?
Well, I've been really lucky, and like at this point, I don't really have to take on anything unless it's something I really want to do. Mm-hmm. And with working with somebody like Patterson, I mean, I just couldn't pass it up, just because, like, you know, like I said, it's like going back to school, and he's teaching me, you know, a lot of things I never really would have thought about before. Mm-hmm. You know, simple stuff sometimes, you know, like if you've got a scene and you've got people eating dinner, you know, it might go on for a couple paragraphs or a page or whatever, and he'll look at it and say, well, why is it so long? They ate dinner. That's like, you can sum it up. You can sum it up in 3 words. Like, you don't need all of these extra words. Yeah. And I talked to Lee Child once about this at Thriller Fest. He's always out there in the hallways, and he'll answer pretty much any question you want. And one of the things that he preaches is that you should write the fast stuff slow and the slow stuff fast. So if it's a slow scene, you know, get it over with, get it, you know, out of that book as quickly as possible with the least amount of words. If it's a faster scene, you know, you can stretch it out a little bit. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it comes down to pacing. And Patterson, like, if every chapter doesn't, you know, add something to the book, if it's not moving that story forward at, you know, 99 miles per hour, it doesn't need to be there, or it's got to be changed. You know, if you get to the end of the scene and you write something that's expected, you know, your characters are doing what the reader thinks they're going to do, it needs to be twisted. It's got to be something different. It's got to be the unexpected. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what I'm taking away from it. I mean, and this book has got so many twists and turns in it. It's got my headspace. Yeah, and I can't wait to sit down and write the next one on my own again, just taking some of these things I've learned and putting it in there.
And that's what I love about his books, because being a writer, it's really hard for me to read some books because the plot turns are so obvious, or I can't watch specific movies. I'll get into them like, oh man, I found 5 different holes in that baby, you know, right out first 2 minutes. So I think it's very exciting. And I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing your wisdom with us. And I hope it inspires other aspiring authors, or even people that have already published 1 or 2 books self-publishing. I hope they hear this podcast and they get inspired from you. And I do hope you can land here in the Pacific Northwest, so then you'll be closer, so you and I can connect face to face someday.
Yeah, I'm actually going to be out there. I got invited to do the keynote at the Chanticleer Writers Conference right outside of Seattle in April.
Okay, fantastic.
Area again sometime soon, and talking about a lot of these similar things, because it's really geared towards writers.
Well, fantastic. Well, we will keep our eyes out for that, because I know that a lot of my listeners are in this greater Seattle area. They may even be at that conference, and they'll have had a little bit of a preview of what you'll be talking about if they listen to the podcast. So that's fantastic. And I'll promote that for you on all of my stuff when you know the details about it. Send it my way and I'll make sure I get it out. So thank you, JD, for taking the time. I know you're super busy. I appreciate it, you coming to the podcast. And listeners, find his work, because I think we're talking to one of the new masters that's coming out. So grab his work, read it, do reviews. He probably doesn't need to lots of reviews, because he's doing great, but I'm sure he'd appreciate it. And thanks again.
You can never have too many reviews.
I know. Yeah. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So one final note, podcast listeners, I wanted to remind you, now that we're in the middle of October, that the Salao Review from Lower Columbia College is an award-winning literary and visual arts magazine, and they are currently in the month of October accepting literary art submissions. You can find information about it in the show notes. If you live in the Lower Columbia region, I encourage you to send a submission for their Volume 19. If you're selected to be in the Salao Review, let me know. Keep in touch with me on social media, and I'll have you on the podcast this summer. I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks. Thank you for listening to the podcast. We hoped you loved hearing from the author as much as we did. If you did enjoy the author, make sure you find them on social media. Buy their book and write a review. Are you a published author and would like to be featured on the podcast? Visit us at our website to learn more. You can help support the production of this podcast by following us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Share the podcast with your friends. And most importantly, become a supporter. Supporters receive monthly bonus podcasts and a newsletter filled with tips from our authors. To find out more how to become a supporter, visit our website. And finally, I hope you always remember to enjoy the journey. Until next week, this is Vikki J. Carter saying goodbye.